You've got a cold open, you mean?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's called my life.
Oh, okay.
My life is
Well,
just one cold open
Those always
that
come out
goes forever.
so strong.
It's like
so
purgatory. Purgatory is just like a cold open that lasts for
that's
hundreds of years, right?
I feel it feels more wrong than I can put my finger on at the moment. So it just
But you can't put
I
your
mean,
finger on
I'll
it,
be
can
honest,
you?
it caught me a little off guard. That analogy caught me so off guard that I can't even criticize it adequately.
Welcome to the Voyage Podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
I don't know if this counts as someone scooping us. I don't know if that's what this is, but the Lord of the Spirits podcast is actually going through a series on the end times.
I can't believe this. I know.
we just happen to be doing, it's a coincidence, I swear, people. No, it's actually just because, full disclosure, it's like Voyage Podcast is putting out a new edition of this book. Okay, well, let's talk about that book. It's a good book, right? So by sheer coincidence,
we had both read that book independently of Voyage saying they wanted to do this, and then when they mentioned it, we were like, oh yeah, then we'll talk about it too, because
that's a good idea.
We wanted to talk about it anyway. We already talk about a bunch of dystopian end of the world sorts of things.
So as it stands, we just happen to be recording this while Lord of Spirits is going through its own series on the end times. And
you plugged that podcast way more enthusiastically than you ever plugged the Voyage book.
But hey, wouldn't it be like an absence of humility if I plugged my own podcast with as much verve? I'm just saying. See, I have to be humble about my own podcast, Mike.
And you work in marketing? Is that right?
Yep, that's true. So we're talking about Lord of the World today.
Yeah, since you always talk about, us ripping off Lord of Spirits, now we're getting like 90% of the title in our title.
Yeah, I know. We're slowly just going to turn into
this actually is the name of a book that came out, believe it or not, before the Lord of Spirits podcast. Lord of the World is a book by Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, who is a priest convert from Anglicanism. So he was a priest in the Church of England, converted to Catholicism, and became, he
would have been like
novelist, but
like 15, 20 years after kind of the heyday of Newman? Or
Yeah. So this was, I think it still kind of qualifies as like part of the Oxford movement, which is where you have John Henry Newman, and then you actually have Tolkien's mom, which is right around this time. Not that she's like considered part of the movement in terms of like a literary figure, but that obviously would have played a huge hand in forming.
That's interesting
Tolkien.
History, though. So that's kind of why Tolkien was Catholic, is because his mother
mom
converted in the midst of, because it's kind of like a Catholic Renaissance in England, right?
Yeah, because then you've got Evelyn Waugh came on a little bit later, but G.K. Chesterton, Father Ronald Knox, Hilaire Belloc as well, and so you've got and I know I'm missing a bunch of figures too, but anyway, Monsignor Benson.
I came across a book that I want to read now. It's called Faith of Our Fathers, and it's actually about. Have you heard of it? It's about the Catholic Renaissance in England.
Yeah,
I'm just curious about it because, and honestly, for me as an Orthodox person, I'm interested in just like the history of Christianity in England, because I know it goes all the way back, even pre-schism, right?
Well,
but I'm also curious about, because the Catholic Protestant thing in England was such a unique part of like Reformation history and really dramatic. And
it's so specific to us as Americans, not only because they're English speakers, and so much of our theology has a little bit of that patrimony, even going back to like when people think, even a lot of Catholics, when they think of like fancy English Bibles, they think of the King James Version. But then also obviously with just the formation of America and how, the religious kind of sects that came over from England because of the Church of England. And so it's sort of ingrained, whether we, grew up Anglican or Episcopalian, just because we grew up in America, it's a big part of our American Christianity. And obviously, and like you said, because the Church of England still, at least on the surface, and I shares a lot of kind of the trappings of Catholicism in England. And so
Sure.
it sort of resonates quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm curious about it. So I'm gonna Faith of Our Fathers. I forget who the author is. I just came across it like yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's in my wish list now. But
So, and that's actually a reference to, so there was a priest named Father Faber, and he wrote a hymn called Faith of Our Fathers. And so I think, and he was another, and I can't remember exactly when he was around or when he was alive, but I think he was also a convert. There's a long line of converts from Anglicanism to Catholicism. And a lot of it just has to do with kind of like what you said, going back into that English patrimony, Christian heritage, and recognizing, that, like you said, it had always been back to like basically the almost 300s. That you've got, and St. Patrick is obviously Ireland, but you're kind of getting into that area, and that's going back to the
British
300s
Isles
too.
is stuck.
So
They're all the
yeah.
same history. I mean, like it's all. I know that they're different nations, and I know that they probably would have a bone to pick at the individual level, at the cultural level, right? Like, don't call me,
So
don't put me in with them, kind of thing. But like that whole area of the world,
it's funny.
is just good
I
history.
just stumbled across somebody because so one of the first bishops in England, I think I can't remember which part, if it was London or if it was Northampton or one of those English places, but one of the first Christian bishops, and this goes back to like the 500s, is Saint Chad. So you know how, and I always thought of that internet meme of the Chad. And I was like, that's the original Chad right there.
Just yesterday, me and some buddies were joking about that. Who was the original Chad? I kid you not. We were having that conversation.
So Saint Chad, and like I said, I can't remember.
Saint Chad. Is he a saint or is he just a bishop?
No, he's a saint. Yeah. So
Saint
if you
Chad?
search Saint Chad,
Wow.
you will find. And
You're
like I said,
welcome,
there's a
internet.
Wikipedia page. So
you're welcome, internet.
But maybe we should get to the. So I kind of gave a little bit. I mean, very very brief background of the book, and I couldn't even remember the exact year. I thought it was like 1910 or 1911 is when it was published. Was Lord of the World published? But
really, I thought it was like 1902 or something like that. But
I mean, if I had a
It's around
hand
the
free,
turn
I
of the
would.
century.
If I had a hand free, I would give it a quick Google. But but anyway, if we were at the bar right now talking, I would not be taking out my phone and Googling it because that would be rude. So I would wait, until.
Okay.
So that's, I'm just trying to keep it authentic. But anyway, the overview of the book stays the same, and this is really the idea is that it's very early 1900s, and the significance of this.
1907.
I feel like if you split the difference, we were half.
Yeah,
right.
that's true. Let's just split the difference.
So what are we seeing? This is
Most of what we say in this podcast, folks, you just split the difference, and you'll approximate something that's probably pretty.
What would you
accurate.
say is splitting the difference between Catholic and Orthodox? What would you call that exactly?
Oh man,
just a better Catholic and worse Orthodox? Is that kind of is that what you'd say?
A better Catholic and a worse Orthodox.
I set
that's
that up
probably
perfectly
where
for you.
I know. You're better at owning Catholicism than I am, to be honest. So I mean,
it's kind of like when you're inside the house, you see it a little bit better. So. But anyway, in this,
you're an Orthodox at heart, Mike. That's
sort of like,
is.
Geez, don't get me in trouble. So the premise of this book is we're kind of set in, I mean, again, if we're talking 1907, we're talking like in the future, but not like thousands of years in the future. We're talking like this could very much be in the present of when this person is writing it.
It's not like
it's not supposed to be. I mean, it is supposed to be in the future, but
people aren't in like, I was about to say they're not in flying cars, but actually they kind of are in flying cars a little bit. But like, it's not the Jetsons. It's much more like an episode of Black Mirror or something like that.
So
where
it's
kind
supposed
of
to be sci-fi, but not sci-fi like a total removal from the world. You're supposed to be able to see yourself as if you could live in this world relatively similar to the world you were living in 1907. And
and actually, let me ask. I mean, would you what's cool? Honestly, maybe one of the most interesting parts of the book, and I liked the book. I mean, it's a good book. The whole story is good, but it's just there's a prologue at the start of it where the main character and another individual are speaking with an older priest, and the priest is basically just running through like the history of the moment, like the
Yeah.
last like 50 to 100 years.
It's that
or
exposition
whatever.
drop that you love, right? That everybody
It
rolls their eyes about when it's in a movie, but everybody's okay with it in a book. But anyway, yeah. So it's basically
but
setting
it's
the scene.
fascinating, and he goes through it, and it kind of makes me. It's like, so I suppose, if he's writing in 1907 and everything is still vaguely approximate to like the culture of 1907,
Yeah.
but you have the book opening with like a 50 to 100 year exposition. I suppose it's probably taking place in 1970, 1980.
Well, it sort of answers the question very briefly, how did we get here? And to kind of get to that. So like, where are we at the start of this book is we are seeing the kind of the rise of this world leader. We have the cooling of religion or faith in general, right? It's becoming a much more secular society. People aren't even, it's not even so much that people are like anti-religion. It's that people don't even think of the religion or the faith anymore. And so what is starting to happen?
This doesn't sound familiar, does it, folks?
No, that's
like,
that kind of goes
so
into the background a
far-fetched.
little bit too, is that's why so many, the last two popes, Francis and Benedict, have both recommended this because it gives you it's so poignant for kind of the world that we're living in today, even though it was written over 100 years ago. And so you've got this priest who is, he's kind of like given this job of, people are worried that this is the Antichrist, right? That this world leader who's coming to power, who's, kind of establishing himself as this kind of secular savior. This priest is like, hey, we think this is the Antichrist, and we got to like figure this out or investigate this, or I don't know. Is that kind of a fair sort of description of the premise?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Yes. I'm not going to say that's not true. Okay. It's kind of like a broad stroke, right? But like, sure. That's more or less how it goes.
And
so they're more like reacting to him than they are like intentionally investigating him. In fact, he's so standoff. Like, he's very mysterious, frankly, throughout the course of the story. I think there's really only one climactic moment where you even like have him like, because it's told from, it's a third person narrative, but it closely hews to the main character's perspective.
Yeah.
And so there's really only one climactic moment in the book where you even like see this messianic figure from the perspective of the main character. Like otherwise the entire book is just other people talking about him and just talking about his effect upon them and his effect upon the world. And like he gets talked, he's like Sauron in Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Like, he doesn't show up. He's just talked about. He's like a force at work in the world, but he's not so much a character in the book, right? And so they're not really investigating him as they are like reacting to him, reacting to his influence on the planet and seeing what that influence is doing specifically to the Catholic Church, because surprise, surprise, the Catholic Church is the only church left. So go figure.
Look, just get used to it, Jacob. Okay, this is what every post-apocalyptic book is gonna have. Well, okay, at least the ones written by Catholics so far. So
right.
Yeah. And there's there's kind of like a B and a C story that's taking place as well, which I think fills out the world a little bit. Besides the getting to see the rise of this secular Messiah, the secular leader, and that gives us a little bit of a glimpse into that world, which, going along with the general cooling of religion, gives you it's one of those moments that can be a little bit spooky in terms of how spot on it is to kind of the world we're living in. So that's where I kind of wanted to get into, because we're not doing like a book report of Lord of the World, and we should even talk about one of the reasons why we're talking about it is because Voyage is putting together is it like a reprint, a classic reprint?
Yeah. Well, they're going to include artwork produced by Voyage, though. So it'll stand apart from your typical just kind of like Dover publication, because it'll actually have illustrations in it from a Voyage comic artist. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. What did I like? The best thing ever.
You're not excited
need to like go order your copy like right this minute. I have got like 7 for all of my nieces and nephews.
See, we try to write scripts for Jacob, and he's always like, no. I want it to sound more real and how enthusiastic I am. And then he just comes off with the meh, like that's.
No, This is a good book. It's awesome that Voyage is putting out a new edition of it
So and
with custom illustrations.
so I back up to say that we didn't want to just do a book report of like just giving a general summary. We wanted to give the overview, kind of give the premise, and then we're going to go into some of the big themes that stood out to us when we first read it, or I think you listened to the audiobook too, Jacob, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because-
I actually did
yeah.
experience it through audiobook.
So what was I don't know, like just some of the themes that kind of popped out for you that stuck out the most when you
know, so what's interesting about this, and at some point I suppose we'll just have to do a unique episode for That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
But I actually read That Hideous Strength probably within 6 months of reading Lord of the World. And this would have been like 2 years ago.
Well,
maybe.
see, and he would have never read Lord of the World unless we made him, because it's by a Catholic author. Whereas,
and you gave me 2 years advance notice to do it so that I was well prepared for this episode. So, no, actually, I think it was my other buddy. I don't even think it was you guys that got me reading that book.
No, That Hideous Strength was the one that I told you about like years ago. And then Lord of the World was more recent. But yeah, anyway,
so they're actually, what I was getting at though, is that they're kind of like, they'll always be kind of in proximity to each other in my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just poignance as like a double feature, if you will, of like novels to read.
And That Hideous Strength is very much an apocalyptic novel, but it's not apocalyptic in the actual end of the world like Lord of the World is.
Lord of the World is about the end of the world.
Lord of the World is
whether that's a spoiler or not.
Very much like Book of Revelation, actual end of the world sort of book.
It's like the Left Behind series.
Okay,
from a Catholic perspective.
Why are you trying to?
Only one novel.
You are the worst pitch man. It's like, first of all, you're not even excited at all, and then you start comparing it to the Left Behind series.
Wait a second. Have you not read any of those books? When I was an evangelical, I read most of them, and they were they're entertaining.
Okay, I was gonna say that's the bone that I'll throw is entertaining.
Yeah, but they're well scripted kind of political thrillers from a very specific branch of Protestants.
And Jacob's not actually saying one of his favorite themes because I think he is embarrassed to say he didn't read it, or he forgot about the book, or sorry.
What am I forgetting about?
No, I said, what's your favorite theme? And we haven't gotten into a theme yet.
Oh. Well, no, all right.
You just want to keep talking about your life.
Egocentric. But no, it's just, so what I was going to say is that for whatever reason, we ended up talking about like the big 3 dystopian novels of the mid 20th century frequently on this podcast. I guess that's just like the times we're living in, Mike. But like there's also these kind of dystopian novels that are from a very specific Christian perspective, and arguably a classically Christian perspective. I mean, C.S. Lewis was Anglican, but he was probably a pretty traditionalist Anglican, especially by today's standards. And
we've also talked about Canticle for Leibowitz.
And Canticle for Leibowitz is really up there too, right? So like you have these really interesting dystopian novels that talk about like an apocalyptic future.
And we've mentioned Brave New World as well. So yeah,
those are the big 3. No, the big 3 that I was referring to when I said mid-20s is 1984, Fahrenheit 451, and Brave New World, right?
For sure.
And they're poignant. They talk a lot about things that we see happening in our society, but they're secular. They're not talking about these things from a Christian perspective. So when you read something like Lord of the World or That Hideous Strength, or even Canticle for Leibowitz, you are getting things from a specifically Christian perspective, and they're still good writing. Like they're not like weird propaganda stuff, right? Like they're just good stories. And so when you ask me what about the themes of Lord of the World that struck out to me, what I was trying to say 15 minutes ago was that I'll never disentangle the themes of that book from the themes of That Hideous Strength, because they cover a lot of the same ground in a lot of ways, but they're telling very different stories though. So that's what makes it kind of interesting. Lord of the World is much more of like, I'm going to I'm going to try to like wrap a story around what the book of Revelation is talking about from a Catholic perspective, right? And as such, you have, but it's at a ground level. You're seeing everything outside of those like B and C stories that you talk about, but still like you're viewing these things from the eyes of like the characters in the book, right? And
Yeah.
Father Francis,
Yeah.
that's the main character, right? Yeah. It's basically so much of his what's resonant is his kind of despair.
Mhm.
I think it's really authentic. I think that like you get a lot of honest like just despair and having to like find faith
Well,
in the face of
it's very
catastrophe.
consistent with the kind of the veil of tears image that Christianity has always held to, which is, and I think and again, not to keep making this about Tolkien or whatever, but like there's that line that Tolkien has about Providence being like that series of losses, and how it's just like you are powering through or
Mm.
being faithful through
Yeah,
one loss
the
after
long
another.
defeat, is that what you're
Yeah, long
referring?
defeat.
Yeah. The long
And
defeat is like a
so
line that Tolkien uses,
so
yeah.
you see that in Father Francis. Another example actually, so and obviously this doesn't stand like in terms of classics like 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World, and it doesn't have the old quality of like Lord of the World or That Hideous Strength even, but there is actually a new series that I'd recommend by Michael O'Brien, who has he has two apocalyptic novels like in a series, and then we're waiting on a third one, but it's the Father Elijah series. Um,
Hmm.
so Father Elijah is the first book. It's like Father Elijah and Apocalypse, and then book 2 is Elijah in Jerusalem. And you are kind of left on this cliffhanger, but those are two really good, like well thought out and substantial apocalyptic novels from and he's Catholic too, so I hope that's not going to
Mhm.
hurt your sensibilities,
Yeah.
Jacob. But
Is
yeah.
the Catholic Church the only church that exists in his novels
Actually,
too?
no, they're still an Orthodox church, and there are
Oh,
faithful Orthodox. So
no
yeah,
kidding.
yeah.
That's impressive.
He's also he can be critical of Catholic hierarchy or just certain branches of Catholicism and stuff like that. But anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, you're kind of talking about the the kind of just perseverance of faith when
Well, yeah, and
nothing is going right for the church,
there's
nothing's
this
going right for Christianity, or nothing's going right for
so the theme of despair on the one hand, right? And it's kind of unflinching,
Mhm.
Um Benson doesn't shy away from the emotions and the turmoil in the soul that like Father Francis is going through. But there's
Yeah,
also, yeah, the necessary corollary is the kind of like undaunted courage and even just like simple moving forward in mundane ways, like just
yeah.
every day, just kind of like tying those shoestrings and just like continuing to like walk faithfully,
Well,
even as the world is literally falling apart. Even the spiritual world, even like the Catholic Church is kind of falling down, not spiritually
it's
per se, but
it's
materially.
contracting. It's contracting. It's like
Yeah.
taking a big breath in, right? Because everything is converging towards Rome. That's kind of one of the later scenes, is that
Mm-hmm.
all of these like Catholic, like basically all the Catholics are coming back to Rome to kind of like come together. And that's what sort of brings us to one of the final moments in the story. But it's funny you mentioned despair actually, because even though he'll show the despair um, in his main character not succumbing to it because of faith, the world that he's living in is very much surrounded by despair as well, but on the opposite side of the coin, because
Yep.
one of the most prominent themes, or I would say like B stories, is the kind of euthanasia conversation
Yes.
in one of the other characters, right? In one of the kind of the
Yep.
side characters. And so what's so interesting about that is you have two examples now, because that's actually a huge thing that comes up in Canticle for Leibowitz too, right? They have the centers where people
Yes.
can basically be euthanized because they've despaired of the world that they were living in the situation. And this, by the way, is in the third section of Canticle for Leibowitz, where that's the most technologically advanced that we see throughout the
Yeah.
whole
It's the
story.
most future.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most futuristic.
And so it's the same thing here. is you have these,
You've
euthanasia
returned to a decadent society kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like in the Leibowitz story, like you've gone full circle. You've gone through the Dark Ages. You've gone
And-
through the Renaissance, and now you're back to like a decadent modernity. And mercy killing is the name of the game. Like when the pain is too much,
the existential pain. Yeah.
yeah, or even the physical pain, right? In Leibowitz, there's physical pain at play that's being
Mhm.
addressed. But yeah, in Lord of the Worlds, yeah, it's just this existential. Which I mean, we're seeing that play out.
Yeah.
If listeners aren't familiar with, it's called MAID, MAID. I forget what the acronym even stands for. It's euthanasia, though. It's Canada's euthanasia program,
Mhm.
and it's really picking up traction, and you occasionally hear some people rumbling about how people within the program are arguing that even psychic pain would be a justifiable excuse for
Well, that's just it. Is
euthanasia.
like, isn't that the exact argument for, when people want to, die by their own hand, outside of these kind of sterilized environments? And so
Hmm.
it's almost like, why wouldn't it be justification? Like, why does it have to be just this version? It seems arbitrary. And that's when things start to get opened up for basically anything and everything. And that's kind of what we are seeing in the Lord of the World, and it becomes a huge kind of talking point, or I guess a huge. And what's so interesting is that, like, Father Benson, like, why did he use that as like his main? Like, why was that the main thing that he wanted to kind of? It wasn't just that he had an axe to grind, because in 1907, it's not like it was legal in, like, a bunch of different countries, and Lord of the World changed everybody's mind. Like, and so why did he see this as? This was the point that he wanted to drive home in so many of his conversations between, the characters in the novel, or that's what the one character was wrestling with throughout the novel, and that sort of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's so accurately predicted,
Mm-hmm.
and all the talking points are the exact talking points that are being discussed nowadays when it's actually happening,
Yeah.
right? And the way that it's handled in the book, it's this really riveting chapter where when the characters goes through with it, and it's in this really beautiful space, and they make it feel like a really cozy environment, and it's just like, it's as simple as this, dearie. There's just like a maternal, you know motherly nurse lady, and she's like, it's going to be, everything, and it's all just, you know pleasantries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing to see here, nothing to worry about, kind of thing. This is just normal. And I suppose, the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, there was a lot of like revolutionary rhetoric going on already in those days. I'm not sure how big euthanasia was,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be surprised if it was part of the zeitgeist. I know a lot of like eugenics in general were kind of like having their heyday around this era. And so
Mm.
he could have just been picking up on just this materialist pervasion of how we deal with like human problems.
Well,
And
and
it's like, well, you know,
I think you mentioned the materialism, which I think, from a metaphorical standpoint, it is a sort of euthanasia at large of a culture or of a people. When you see yourselves as, there's nothing more than just what's right in front of me, or nothing more than just this world. And so you've already sort of committed spiritual euthanasia. And so
mm,
it kind of logically follows, well, then what else do we have? And then you start to have the physical, then you have the, quote unquote real euthanasia, right? And so
hmm
I'm not trying to like psychologize Father Benson and say that's what he was trying to make a metaphor of. I mean, in one sense, it kind of, even if it accidentally fits, it still kind of fits.
Well, I also think, I suspect that there might just be something to um, how easy it is to make the argument. In other words,
Uh-huh.
I think that, as terrible as this is, there's something that feels very sympathetic
Yeah.
to arguments for euthanasia. And so I think both Leibowitz and Lord of the World want to tackle euthanasia because it's such a dangerously seductive, um, suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, knowing
And
why it's wrong doesn't necessarily make it less tempting, right? That's true for a lot of sins. So why would it be any different from
well,
this one?
and I think it's interesting that, well, especially in Leibowitz, I mean, you're talking about like a child in pain, right?
Yeah.
Not to give too many details, but Leibowitz is crushing. Leibowitz, like the third book in Canonical for Leibowitz, has this really, really sad story arc about, and it's not the entire story arc, but it's just like a sub element of the story that's regarding, a child suffering from fallout.
Mhm.
And the secular authorities wanting to put the child to death, and the Catholic authority arguing against it, fighting against it, right?
Yeah.
And the book doesn't shy away from how hard that decision is, like how tough it is to stand up in the face of suffering and say, no, the suffering must go on. Like, no, the suffering must go on. And when it's arguably a more harrowing story than what takes place in Lord of the World. But Lord
Yeah.
of the World is just another, these are all just like different examples of like how euthanasia can get brought up. So they're not in conflict with each other. They're just like on the spectrum.
Mm.
And in Lord of the World, it's much more of just like a decadent society where it's like if you just get like tired of living, then like just end it. And that's what that character is doing in that book. It's like this is just getting too complicated for me. I'm just kind of tired of all this, so I'm just gonna like lay down and put it all
Well,
down kind of thing.
and
And
in some sense, that resonates even more, right? When we talk about I mean, whether it's the apathy or just the rise in mental health needs or depression and things like that, where it's almost like, yeah, we're just kind of bored of life or bored of the world. Oh, there's the tagline right there. There's the
bored
title
of
right
the
there.
world. Oh
Ah,
no.
yeah.
Sounds like a Mad Magazine cover. But the that was pretty good, man. um, and it's just it's interesting that I applaud authors who want to like take these challenges head on, right? Like let's have a conversation about let's make a really because Lord of the Worlds creates a scenario in which it's like a really pleasant experience. It's just like this just stoic decision to go like kill yourself. And it's just, smells like cookies. And, there's puppies playing in the yard. And it's honestly like, have you ever seen Soylent Green?
So, okay, I have it like it's on one of those lists where it's like my list to watch later or whatever. And I know the ending, like I know the premise and I know the ending enough where I almost feel like I don't need to see it, you know? Because I
Yeah.
know what is Soylent Green or what's the secret ingredient,
Yeah.
right? You know?
What's in Soylent Green?
Yeah, exactly.
um,
So like I know what you're kind of getting at in terms
Well, no,
of, but
actually,
anyway, sorry.
so
Yeah.
if you haven't seen the movie, like so that whole thing, that movie it's a Charlton Heston flick, one of my all-time favorite movie stars. Every movie he's in, he's the best part of that movie. But he is a down on his luck private detective in the future, and it's like this Malthusian nightmare where like overpopulation has destroyed the world, and everything. It's just humans living on top of humans. And so people are eating these Soylent Green bars, which think about. Have you ever seen Snowpiercer and the world's frozen over and they're all eating like grasshopper?
So I did see the movie Snowpiercer with Chris Evans. I haven't seen the
Yeah.
TV show about it. So I know,
No, I
yeah,
haven't seen
it's
the TV show. We'll
same
talk about
kind of idea.
Snowpiercer sometime. That's an interesting story. But the only reason I was bringing Snowpiercer up is they're all eating those like grasshopper bars in
Yeah.
like the beginning. And in Soylent Green, it's kind of the same
What's less
situation.
appetizing than bugs? What's
Soylent Green will answer that question for
yeah,
you.
exactly.
I'm being coy about it because I feel like I should be, but like I think that you could almost infer like what the story of
And
Soylent Green
the
is.
movie's been around for like 60 years, so
It has been around for like 60 years, and I'll also just say this: the tagline for the Soylent Green Corporation is their motto is Soylent Green is people. So
oh, but it's like supposed to be a metaphor, but then you realize, wait a second.
Well, it's like we're of the people, we're for the
Yeah.
people, like we are the people kind of thing. Yep. So
So,
anyway, yeah.
very clever.
Anyway, he's investigating some shenanigans regarding Soylent Green Corporation. But because the whole movie is about overpopulation, a main element to that movie is euthanasia, and so they have euthanasia pods, and they go and it's pleasant. Like they put you in this room, and it's 360 degrees surrounded oval room,
Yeah.
and they just like play like soft music, and it's just like mountain vistas and like pretty pictures and peaceful, and they kind of like hum you to sleep kind of thing, and then
Mhm.
they kill you, right? And so like it's just, this is a perennial depiction of euthanasia. It's like we're just gonna like, you don't have to suffer, you
Sanitize
can
it.
just
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're just gonna sanitize it, and you're just gonna peacefully drift off to sleep and not wake up. um and so that's a story. Soylent Green's a story that's written 70 years after Lord of the Worlds. Lord of the World was there first, though, for sure. Um, and I don't know. It's. I think that people don't understand like
Well,
what's so bad with euthanasia
and
now,
Brave New World has
right?
it too, and The Giver actually. If
Oh,
you're
of
ever
course, yeah.
Brave New
And The
World and The
Giver.
Giver both have the euthanasia kind of storyline as part of theirs too. They don't go into it, like they don't talk about it as much. Like they don't wrestle with it in those stories like Lord of the World does though. And that's
Well,
what I
come to
think.
think of it, like also Logan's Run.
Oh, sure.
Logan's
Yeah.
Run. Logan's Run is maybe the most hilarious depiction.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't read the I haven't read the book, but I have seen the
I've seen the
movie.
movie, yeah.
Yeah, and in the movie, because the premise of Logan's Run is it's a hedonistic, perfect society, but no one lives past the age of 30 because everyone gets killed, or they have a phrase for it in the movie. I forget.
They like ascend up this
Yeah,
like
ascend. Yeah,
yeah.
it like they all ascend, quote unquote, at 30, to make way for the rest of society. And I think the idea is that you get reborn at that point. Like that's the story they tell everybody
Yeah.
anyway. So everyone just voluntarily goes to get like reborn. And it looks like that scene in Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory
Yeah.
where they're all drinking like the bubble soda, and it makes you float, but they're like floating towards a big fan in Willy
Uh-huh.
Wonka. In Logan's Run, it's the exact same situation. Only when they finally make it to the top, they blow up. So it's it's pretty great. Go check
Yeah.
out Logan's Run. But yeah, lots of people. It's like euthanasia and the end of the world go hand in hand, right? It's just
Well,
that seems to be just kind of where
well that
these
kind of
authors
goes
go with
it
it.
kind of goes back to my thing of like it's almost like when you've committed spiritual euthanasia, then physical euthanasia is going to logically follow. And
Hmm.
so a lot of times, even though somebody like Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, isn't going to use that type of language of saying these people committed spiritual euthanasia, right? Because he's coming from a very secular perspective. He is going to see that like they've cut themselves off from anything beyond just what is, like you said, the pleasures of this world or the experiences of this world. And so that it only makes sense that you are going to cut yourself off next.
Yo,
So
it gives because so much of like the existentialist answer to the loss of God, right?
yeah,
Is that like, oh well, we're gonna bravely like make meaning out of meaninglessness. Like you
uh,
can't tell me my life's not meaningful. I constitute what my life is. Like I decide that my life is meaningful,
I'm not a
right?
hero on a journey, but I'm going to pretend I am. And that's
I
somehow going to
know, right?
like convince me that
We're
I
going
am.
to, yeah. And it's like, okay, but then how come why is it so obvious that like euthanasia is just like the obvious choice then?
Yeah.
It's like, because it's like your meaning cannot rest upon you making your own meaning up. You
You,
can ride that game for a couple decades, and but everyone just gets worn down by it.
well, no,
Everyone just
and
it's
really
just
what you're actually writing is the exhaust from the fumes from previous, the previous
real
tradition.
meaning,
Yeah.
real
From real
meaning,
meaning.
right?
It's,
Because like what they've done is they've basically just like redefined what the word meaning is. I've
mhm.
come to realize that so much of what's wrong with like modernity as such is like we've redefined terms so far removed from their original meanings that people don't remember like original meanings anymore. And so now it's like, oh, when a person says I can have meaning outside of God, they believe it because they think meaning means something I make up.
Yeah.
And it's like, meaning doesn't mean something you make up. When
Says
I say
who?
something means, I know, says who, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's like if I say that means something, that I'm not saying I'm imagining something.
Well, no,
I am
it's the
saying
balance
no, like
between the
those
objective and the
words,
subjective.
a stop sign,
Yeah.
if I say a stop sign means something, I'm not saying I'm going to determine what that stop sign means. I'm saying no, that stop sign is trying to tell you something. It exists outside of your subjective interpretation. That's what meaning is. Meaning is not something you make up.
Oh,
Meaning
Jacob's
is something
going
that
after the
you
subjectivists. Watch out, George Berkeley. Watch out,
anyway,
Descartes. He's coming for
yeah,
you.
well, people just kind of like, but people, they think that if I call it meaning, then it must be meaning because we're just okay with just like redefining things now. But if you have a firm foundation, a house built on rock, if you will, then you can see just how sandy everyone else's foundation is.
Or the rock.
But the
right?
people in the front, huh?
I said, or the rock, right?
Or the rock. You're picking up what
I'm
I'm
just
laying
sneaking.
down.
I'm just sneaking in a Peter Pope reference for you. So
Oh,
I had to
and
go
I
there.
I thought you were talking about Jesus, Mike. I should have known you were talking about the Pope, you papist. But so anyway, like, in Lord of the Worlds, you get a really, really harrowing depiction in just how pleasant it is. It's creepy because it feels authentic, and how they handle it.
Well, yeah, and that goes back to what makes it so tempting. Which again, it's not about we're not even talking about whether it's right or wrong. Like we're kind of assuming that it's more the even if you take the assumption that it's wrong, why is it still so tempting? And that kind of leads into the next kind of big theme that I wanted to discuss a little bit, which is because one of the big things that makes this secular Messiah figure in Lord of the Worlds so enticing is that he's bringing about world peace, right? He's bringing about, and so on the surface, you're like, wait, isn't this a good thing? I thought this was supposed to be the bad guy, right? And so it's the
and that's what's so compelling. It's just all so compelling.
Yeah.
The people, like, there's the who's the Oliver.
Oh, don't ask me names. I'm not going to remember the names.
There's another main character who is a secular person, and he's not just he's actually high up in the governments of like the kind of secular state that's kind of taken over most of the world from Britain, right? Because it's another situation where like the world's basically been divided into like three parts, kind of like 1984, and at the start of it, or at least I think that's true. So one of the characters is a secular perspective, right? And he's in government, and you see the ascent of the Antichrist from his perspective, and he's obviously like a devotee. Like he's like, this is great, this is wonderful, and look at what we've done. So much of what they
it's kind of like Ginger in The Last Battle. It kind of reminded me of to use another C.S. Lewis End of the World book, the seventh Narnia book, The Last Battle. Ginger the cat kind of becomes like the spokesperson for the Antichrist figure.
Shift.
Well, yeah.
It's been a long time since I read that book. I remember that book being.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. But,
no, it's fine. Anyway, like, so it's fascinating to see him look at all this and just how compelling it all is. Like, it's awesome. It's like, look at how much good is going on. Look at what we've done. Like, and they openly, I think the only thing that's kind of, it's almost too on the nose and as such almost unrealistic is just how much theological language the secular authorities in Lord of the World use to describe what they're doing. I feel like if I'm looking at the way the world is in the 21st century, I think that we've moved past even like using theological language to describe
like
things.
It wouldn't be compelling anymore.
It wouldn't be reasonable. But like people like Oliver Brand, that's the name of the secular character in the book.
Maybe Benson was going after capitalism by naming him Brian.
Ew. He talks about like bringing heaven to earth. He's talking about like how we're all gods. Like everything he says is like we are true religion because we're not fake. Like everything he says though is basically metaphysical language, and it's the wholesale adoption of metaphysical language being used by a thoroughly materialist worldview. And so it's interesting to read. It's an interesting story choice, right? But probably the most far-fetched thing in the whole book. And it's a book about the end of the world. And so the most far-fetched thing about the book is that they're still willing to use theological language instead of just like adopting. But if you were
somebody reading it in 1907.
In 1907, I'm sure
it would have been like, oh yeah, that is how they're going to talk, when the end of the, because that still would have made sense
to be
an audience in
honest,
1907.
We might get there. Like we might actually just go through, because right now it's basically all therapeutic language, right? We don't talk about soul. We talk about like brain chemistry or behaviorism or whatever, or therapy, right? And I mean, I'm not opposed to the use of the word therapy, but like it makes me laugh how much of our language is talking about spiritual things, but we pretend we're not talking about spiritual things because we have like psychoanalytic language for it.
Yeah. It is going to be one of those things where we will come full circle, and that will be the irony.
Yeah,
of it
eventually, give it like, I don't know, we'll say like 40, 50 years, and we're going to like freely adopt metaphysical language once again, only it'll be from this like decidedly materialist perspective. Creepy. Honestly, that's but yeah, so that's what Benson's predicting, right? That's what he's.
I'm usually more hopeful than you though, Jacob. So
well, yeah.
Oh, I mean, Did I say hopeful? I meant naive.
Yeah, I was about to say we'll see how that plays out for you, man. Nothing dies on the internet, so these recordings
so you're gonna own me in 50 years and be like, "See, Mike, you were wrong," and I'll be like, "Who are you? Do we know each other?"
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it's the world peace, but at what cost? And what you were kind of, alluding to or getting at is this concept that, neither of us made this up by any means, but it's the whole Christianity without Christ, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you were saying about the adopting metaphysical or theological language, but it's not grounded in an actual theology. It's not grounded in, anything beyond myself. And that's where, is it going to achieve what we might call world peace on the surface? But again, every tyrant, every dictator was trying to achieve world peace. It just was world peace under my thumb.
Right.
And, breaking a few eggs to make an omelet. And so that's where, is the egg in this case, or is the egg that's being broken in Lord of the World ultimately is going to be seen as the church. And that's the egg that's going to have to be broken to make the omelet of world peace. And that's what, Father Benson is really trying to kind of like, I don't know if you want to say wake people up to. I mean, I know that sort of language is not the most helpful sometimes, but that is kind of,
it's trying to
that is sort of what
red pill people 1907 style.
Oh man. Yeah. So one of the really huge events, one of the big, I would almost call it like a turning point in the novel.
Well, wait a second. Let me just say, like, one of the things that gets talked about a lot, though, is because this idea of Antichrist is anti means instead of, right? It's not like opposite of, it's instead of. In other words, it's like a substitute Christ, not this kind of like Omen-esque, Damien-esque, I'm going to be everything I'm going to be the opposite of Jesus, right? That would be much more of like a Satan figure.
Like a Hellraiser kind of.
Yeah, right. We're not, the Antichrist is not like the opposite of Jesus. The Antichrist is what people choose to substitute for Jesus. So he's achieving, in theory, he's going to achieve the things that Jesus is supposed to be achieving for people, but they're choosing his way instead of Jesus's way. And so like what you see happening in the Lord of the World is this idea that there's like peace, but it's this peace through basically like the easy way out and hedonism and decadence and just kind of like, and there's this strange, the book doesn't really describe it, because at the end of the day, the Antichrist figure, Falsenberg or is it really Falsenberg? That's a little bit on the nose, wouldn't it be? Like Falsenberg. Whatever. It starts with an F. I can't remember. The Antichrist figure though, like you know, he is very mysterious, but he has this mysterious like power over people. So like when people hear him speak, they become hypnotized. You know, the main character has a chance to hear him speak, and he almost like falls under his sway, kind of thing.
And then someone says, "Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth." And that's the end of it.
That's right. That's right.
So what I was kind of transitioning us into kind of the third big theme was the turning point in the book is when the Pope forms this new religious order. Do you remember what the order is called? It's okay if you don't. I do.
I don't remember. I remember it being a cool name.
It's the Order of Christ Crucified.
Yeah,
which I think is so
cool.
significant because it is very much like that was the tone, that was the posture that the saints are going to need to take. I mean, it's what they need to take in every age, right? Ultimately, but the church needs to follow the model of Christ crucified before it can follow the model of Christ resurrected. And so what he sees is that, you know, if this is the end of the world, then it's going to usher in the new heavens and the new earth, right? According to our faith, if that's, you know, if this is the Pope speaking, if this is the church speaking. And so he forms this order, and it's basically, well, I won't go too far down the rabbit trail, but it's basically that you're supposed to adopt this posture of sacrifice.
Yeah, it's
right?
a martyr. It's an order of martyrs, basically.
Yeah. And so what this obviously does is that this is what empowers the church to kind of drive her, you know, and be that presence in the world and make an impact on the world, the impact that the church is always supposed to make when the end comes. And because, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, what's the premise of the book is that there's this cooling of religion. And you kind of said, you made the comment of like, oh, I wonder if this has any connections to, you know, life today. And it's like, this is the application, is that regardless of whether this is the quote unquote end of the world as we know it, right? Didn't think we were going to get an REM reference in, but is that adopting the
I feel
posture
fine
of Christ
about
crucified.
that. So
that's very good. I lobbed it up and you slammed it home. So is even though, right, if you're just reading the book, you're like, wait, the church's impact is diminishing, right? Jesus's impact was diminishing when he was carrying the cross up the hill of Calvary, when he was being nailed to the cross. His impact, according to the way the world saw impact, was diminishing. It was at its lowest point. And yet it's when we re-examine what does impact on the world mean, right? That's when grace was operating the most. And so in the same way, right, that's when the church was most resembling Christ, is when it took on this posture of Christ crucified. And that's what sort of, like I said, kind of drove the rest of the book home and led to the, you know, the climax of the book basically and stuff.
No, it's true. And, you know, so when people sign up for the order, they have to kind of get vetted by the church, and it's almost like this kind of spiritual paramilitary, you know, kind of troop, because it's like, you know, you can't have like you're signing up to die. Like this is a suicide mission kind of thing. Only it's not like a suicide mission in the sense that like, you know, we have some kind of suicidal thing for you to do. It's more of like, you're going to hold fast the faith even when people decide they're going to kill you.
You're volunteering to be a lamb for the slaughter.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, you know, you look around and you see the way things are nowadays, where there a lot of people throw out this language of it, we being a post-Christian nation, right? And so the idea is that like we've lived our entire lives, like myself included, largely in a construct where Christianity is either a social neutral or sometimes even a social good, right? It used to be all social good, and then it became kind of socially neutral, but now it's kind of becoming socially negative. Like you cannot speak out against abortion or like homosexual acts or anything like that without it having a negative effect on your social influence, right? You know, and eventually that turns to violence. Eventually, I'm not trying to be all negative or cynical, and who knows, maybe I'm wrong, and that's great. Don't worry about it. But like, you just see, you know, I don't know what's going on up in Canada these days, man. But Canada's gotten kind of crazy, and there's lots of Catholic churches that are just like being vandalized, and some of them are being burned to the ground and things like that. Specifically Catholic churches, because the Catholic Church does a pretty decent job of like standing up to a lot of the, anti-Christian elements within culture.
And historically in Canada, it's probably still the most at least visible, even if it's not like there's the strongest fervor there too. Because you have especially the parts that were colonized, you could say, by France. I mean, that's going to come from a lot of that, because a lot of those missionaries came over from France during the French Revolution, when a lot of them it was either leave or die, and so they came over to Quebec area and then to the Americas, because there's a lot of like Northeast United States too, where you'd have a lot of these and actually down in our area, right? Because we have a bunch of the French Jesuit missionaries who came, and that's why we've got Marquette University here in Milwaukee.
And just like Fond du Lac, like there's just lots of like French stuff in Wisconsin. But it's, I don't know. This podcast is supposed to be kind of like upbeat and lighthearted, so I'm not sure how dark I want to go.
So why this is actually one of the main reasons why we have always been having end times predictions, and why we're still writing end times novels, and why we keep writing them. It's not because we're so dumb and we're not listening to, well, maybe some of us are dumb and not listening to what Jesus said about knowing the day or the hour. I don't actually think that that's the main reason why. I don't think that it's all just trying to like go over Jesus's head. I mean, like I said, I know that there are times when that does happen, or I'm not always going to assume the best motives. What I think it really is a reflection of is one of the first things that St. Peter says at Pentecost, right after the descent of the Holy Spirit, is that we are living in the end times. And he says that right at the start of the church. And so we think along those terms, because that's how Christians have been trained to think, right? Or you could say inspired to think from the beginning. And so it only makes sense that you would still have people. And again, Father Benson never speculates what year this will happen. He's not trying to, like I said, go over Jesus's head and say it's going to happen in, 50 years or something. He's only trying to kind of lay out what the situation will look like in a more modern application. So it's just taking kind of what
every
John
generation.
does in Revelation. Yeah, go ahead.
Like, so, there is this misunderstanding about the end times being something that's supposed to take place within like the lifetime of the apostles and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And there's reasons for that. There's some things that Jesus says that makes it kind of sound like that, but that's a misinterpretation of what Jesus is saying.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm so sick of that sort of interpretation when people will say like, well, the apostles didn't expect to, I'm just like, you clearly haven't been paying attention.
You just don't know what you're talking about. But the end, one way for people to understand, because Jesus does and the apostles do, the Bible does talk about the end times and us living in the end times. We think that means the end of the world. It just means the second half of the book. We're going right back to English class, high school English class, where the climax happens actually in the middle of the book. And then the resolution is like the second half of the book, right? It's not like the thing that happens 10 minutes before the end of the movie, right? And so the climax doesn't mean the end. It just means the turning point, the pivot point. And, we're in the end times because anything post-incarnation is the end times. And that can go on for another 10,000 years, right? And that's okay if it goes. It's for our benefit if it does go on for another 10,000 years or another million years. Who cares? The point being, that being said, we are always hopeful to be living in the end times, which is a weird, we get criticized for this as Christians because it sounds defeatist, but it's not about that. It's about, it's the end of Revelation when John says, "Come, Lord Jesus." Like we look forward to the creation being renewed. We look forward to, and when we see all these dark signs and all like in an elevation of like pain in the world, there's always the hope that, well, maybe that means we're almost there, right?
See, and that's what the further up and further in of C.S. Lewis is really like so important, is that it's a further in. It is it's a diving deeper into what's already kind of, it's that incarnational view of reality. It's that there's more to what we can see than just what we see. And so when we talk about, wanting the renewal of heaven and earth, that includes like the earth that we're already seeing right now. And it's diving further inward or deeper inward. And that's what, like when you said Christianity is not about the escapism, right? It's allowing us to enter into reality more fully, more substantially, or more deeply. And we've already talked about how that sacramental view of reality, that helps us do it in this life. And the, just seeing not just, when you happen to be within the four walls of a church as important, but seeing how, to kind of borrow some of your Orthodox language, how all of creation is a sacrament in the sense that it leads you into a deeper relationship with God, that it represents more than what's actually there and all that stuff.
Sure. Well, and it's to again speak to like the tension between, it's good that we exist now, it's good that we're here, but we look forward to the end of things, right? It reminds me of St. Paul saying, it would be better for me to go with Jesus, but I know that it's good that I'm here for you. So, I think he's talking about that in Philippians. Better that I would go with Jesus, but it's meaningful that I'm here for your benefit. So I rejoice that I'm here for your guys' benefit. We have a role of repentance for ourselves primarily. In the Orthodox Church, we sing God grant you many years during an anniversary or a birthday. And the idea is it's like God grant you many more years so you can continue to repent, live longer so you can repent more, kind of thing. But also so that we can continue to basically prepare for and practice the life to come in the present age, right? In some ways, that's what repentance is kind of doing. It's just practice. And so it's good. You want to practice as much as possible before the final test, before the final judgment. But won't it be nice when the test is over and we get to go out to recess?
You mean when you've run the race?
Yeah.
When you've kept the faith?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Something like that.
What was that, Plato?
Oh gosh, don't do that.
But yeah, so we're always fascinated, and honestly, there's maybe just something like we're all just kind of like a little masochistic like that. I don't know. Maybe. We just like to.
Sure, that's a good note. We just like to look. That's definitely the tone that you've been. I was going to say that's definitely the tone that you have been. That's the vibe you've been bringing this today, and so we'll go ahead and end with that. Yeah, thank you, Jacob, for bringing all of us down.
Oh.
Now we're gonna get to go hang out later. You can bring the rest of our friends down. And
we're gonna go do one of those bar nights that started this podcast.
Yeah,
tonight. Yep.
And we'll look forward to just talking with you guys and putting on probably not an end of the world one for a while. We're gonna do some. I got one about comedy that I want us to do next. So maybe.
You want to do something funny? You want to do a little palate cleanser?
Maybe. But
remember to like and subscribe while you have the chance, and also buy the book.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.